Welcome to Whispers of the Guilty, where we explore the world's most haunting and baffling true crime stories. Today, we delve into a case that has haunted Finland for decades: the mysterious and brutal murders at Lake Bodom. In the summer of 1960, four teenagers set out on a camping trip, seeking adventure and tranquility. What they found instead was terror and tragedy. Join me as we uncover the lives of Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson, Mila Irmeli Björklund, Seppo Antero Boisman, and Anja Tuulikki-Maki, and the fateful night that turned their idyllic outing into one of Finland's most infamous unsolved mysteries. The Finnish summer of 1960 was ethereal. Lakes mirrored the sky's infinite blue, and forests stood as green sentinels against the horizon. Among those savoring this idyllic scenery were four teenagers: Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson, his girlfriend Mila Irmeli Björklund, and their friends Seppo Antero Boisman and Anja Tuulikki-Maki. They embarked on a camping trip to Lake Bodom, unaware their outing would become synonymous with one of Finland's most enigmatic and macabre unsolved crimes. Niels, an athletic 18-year-old, was well regarded by his peers for his easygoing nature and love of the outdoors. A natural leader, he often organized trips for his friends. Mila, also 18, was known for her artistic flair and gentle demeanor. She had an eye for beauty, capturing moments through sketches and photographs, especially excited about the picturesque Lake Bodom. Seppo, 18, with his tall, lanky frame and quick wit, was the joker, always lightening the mood. Anja, 15, the youngest, was a quiet, introspective girl, wise beyond her years, with a profound love for literature. Together, the four made a tight-knit group, their camaraderie forged through shared experiences and youthful adventures. The decision to camp at Lake Bodom was spontaneous. It was Seppo's idea, spurred by tales of the lake's tranquil beauty. Niels, always eager for adventure, readily agreed. They planned a simple trip, just a few days of camping, swimming, and basking in the warmth of the Finnish summer. As they packed their supplies, tents, food, and a couple of guitars for impromptu sing-alongs, their excitement was palpable. They arrived at Lake Bodom on June 4, 1960. The lake was everything they had imagined and more. Its serene waters were surrounded by dense forest, offering a sense of seclusion and peace. They found a perfect spot to set up camp, a small clearing close to the water, shaded by tall pine trees. They pitched their tents, built a campfire, and spent the day swimming and laughing, their voices echoing across the water. As evening fell, the mood shifted to a more introspective tone. They sat around the campfire, the flickering flames casting shadows on their faces. Niels strummed his guitar while Seppo recounted ghost stories, each tale more chilling than the last. Mela sketched the scene in her notebook, capturing the ethereal glow of the firelight against the darkening sky. Anja listened intently, her eyes reflecting the dance of the flames. The night deepened, and one by one, they retreated to their tents. Niels and Mela shared one tent, while Seppo and Anja shared the other. The forest around them fell silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant call of a night bird. They drifted off to sleep, their minds filled with the day's adventures and the promise of another beautiful day by the lake. In the quiet hours before dawn, a sense of foreboding seemed to seep into the atmosphere. The tranquil setting that had felt like paradise now seemed to harbor an unseen menace. Shadows lengthened and merged, creating shapes that played tricks on the eyes. The once gentle whisper of the wind through the trees now sounded like the hushed murmurs of unseen watchers. The stage was set for a tragedy that would forever change the lives of those four friends and cast a long, dark shadow over Lake Bodom. Unbeknownst to them, this night of innocent slumber was the precursor to a nightmare. A sinister presence lurked in the darkness, watching, waiting. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the tranquility of Lake Bodom was shattered by an act of violence so brutal, so inexplicable, that it would baffle investigators for decades to come. In the days leading up to this fateful trip, the teenagers had been unaware of any looming danger. Their lives had been filled with the usual concerns of youth: exams, future plans, budding relationships. Niels and Mila were contemplating their future together, while Seppo and Anja were enjoying the simple joys of young love. They were just a group of friends seeking to escape the mundane routines of everyday life, seeking solace and joy in the embrace of nature. The community in Espoo, from where the teenagers hailed, was a close-knit one. Families knew each other, and the disappearance of any child, let alone four, would send ripples of concern through the town. The parents of Niels, Mila, Seppo, and Anya trusted their children to return safely, their only worry being the usual parental concern for their well-being in the wilderness. However, fate had a different plan for these four friends. As they lay sleeping in their tents, oblivious to the encroaching danger, the serenity of their surroundings masked the horror that was about to unfold. The idyllic setting of Lake Bodom, with its breathtaking beauty, would soon become the backdrop for a crime so heinous that it would etch itself into the annals of Finnish history. The night at Lake Bodom transitioned into the early hours of June 5, 1960, with the promise of another beautiful summer day. But instead of waking to the sound of birdsong and the gentle lapping of the lake's waters, the campsite would be engulfed in chaos and terror. The peaceful veneer of the Finnish countryside was about to be irrevocably torn apart, leaving a mystery that would haunt the nation for decades. For Niels and his friends, the journey to Lake Bodom was meant to be a simple escape, a brief respite from their everyday lives. Yet, in the early hours of that fateful morning, their story took a dark and unforeseen turn, setting the stage for one of Finland's most perplexing and enduring mysteries. The dawn of June 5, 1960 began like any other at Lake Bodom. The sun's first light kissed the serene waters, and the forest slowly awakened with the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. But this day, the tranquility of the scene was a cruel illusion, masking an impending horror. As the four teenagers slept peacefully in their tents, the sinister presence that had lurked in the shadows throughout the night began to move. Niels was the first to stir, briefly waking before turning over and falling back into a deep sleep beside Mila. The forest's silence was deceptive, a calm before the storm. In the other tent, Seppo and Anya lay in a similar state of restful slumber, oblivious to the danger closing in around them. Without warning, the tranquil campsite was shattered by an explosion of violence. The attacker, whose identity remains unknown to this day, struck with brutal precision. The serene summer morning transformed into a nightmare as the assailant unleashed a frenzied attack on the sleeping teenagers. The first blow fell with a sickening thud, startling Niels awake, his senses overwhelmed by pain and confusion. Mila, closest to Niels, was struck repeatedly. The brutality of the assault left her no chance to scream, her body succumbing to the onslaught almost immediately. Niels, disoriented and bleeding, tried to fend off the attacker but was quickly overpowered. He suffered severe injuries, his face battered and bones broken, but in a macabre twist of fate, he would survive where his friends did not. Seppo and Anya in the adjacent tent were equally defenseless. The attacker, moving with terrifying efficiency, slashed and bludgeoned them, ensuring they had no chance to escape or call for help. Their tent, once a symbol of youthful adventure, was now a scene of unimaginable horror. Blood soaked the ground, mingling with the earth in a grotesque testament to the violence that had transpired. As quickly as the attack began, it ended. The assailant vanished into the forest, leaving behind a scene of carnage and confusion. The peaceful shores of Lake Bodom, moments before a haven of serenity, were now stained with the blood of innocent youth. The only sounds were the labored breaths of Niels, struggling to cling to consciousness amidst the chaos. Hours passed before the first signs of life reappeared at the campsite. Two boys out on a morning fishing trip stumbled upon the scene. Their carefree morning was instantly transformed by the sight of the devastated campsite. They rushed to get help, their young minds struggling to process the macabre tableau they had discovered. Local authorities arrived swiftly, their faces grim as they took in the gruesome scene. The bodies of Mila, Seppo, and Anya lay lifeless, their injuries a brutal testament to the savagery of the attack. Niels, barely conscious and covered in blood, was rushed to the hospital. His survival was nothing short of miraculous, but his injuries were severe, both physically and psychologically. As Niels fought for his life in the hospital, the investigation into the Lake Bodom murders began in earnest. The peaceful Finnish countryside was now the epicenter of a mystery that would baffle investigators for decades. The initial theories were as varied as they were numerous, ranging from a deranged local hermit to an international fugitive. The sheer brutality of the crime suggested a level of premeditation and rage that defied easy explanation. The police scoured the area for clues, searching for any evidence that might point to the identity of the killer. Footprints, bloodstains, and other forensic details were meticulously documented. The tents, now torn and bloodied, were examined for any signs that might reveal the attacker's identity. Yet, despite their best efforts, the clues were frustratingly scant. Niels, once he regained consciousness, provided his account of the attack. His memories were fragmented, clouded by pain and trauma. He recalled the sudden intrusion of a shadowy figure into their campsite. The attack began with the sound of a tent being ripped open, followed by blinding pain as he was struck repeatedly. He could barely make out the assailant's silhouette in the dim light, but the violence was swift and unrelenting. Myla's screams echoed in his ears as the attacker turned his focus on her. The brutality was overwhelming, leaving her no chance to fight back. Niels tried to intervene, but his efforts were met with further blows, his body succumbing to the onslaught. His vision blurred, and he felt himself slipping into unconsciousness, his last coherent thoughts filled with terror and confusion. Seppo and Anya in the adjacent tent were similarly attacked with ruthless efficiency. The assailant moved with a deadly purpose, ensuring that no one could escape or call for help. The forest, once a haven of peace, now bore witness to an act of inexplicable savagery. The serene shores of Lake Bodom, which had welcomed the teenagers with open arms, were now stained with their blood. As Niels drifted in and out of consciousness, he caught glimpses of the aftermath. The attacker seemed to vanish as quickly as he had appeared, leaving a scene of unimaginable horror. The quiet of the forest resumed, indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded within its depths. Niels's thoughts were a jumbled mix of pain, fear, and a desperate desire to survive. The morning sun began to rise, casting a cruel light on the devastated campsite. Two young boys out for an early fishing trip stumbled upon the scene. Their innocent excitement turned to horror as they realized the gravity of what lay before them. They ran to get help, their frantic cries breaking the silence that had settled over the lake. When the authorities arrived, they found Niels barely alive amidst the wreckage of their camp. He was rushed to the hospital, his injuries severe but not fatal. The bodies of Myla, Seppo, and Anya were discovered with wounds that spoke of a frenzied, almost inhuman rage. The serene landscape of Lake Bodom had become a tableau of macabre violence, a stark contrast to its natural beauty. The investigation began immediately, with local authorities determined to find the perpetrator. Detective Inspector Oiva Kivaladi, a seasoned officer known for his meticulous attention to detail, was assigned to lead the case. The first step was to interview Niels, hoping his fragmented memories might offer some clue to the identity of the killer. Niels's account, though disjointed, provided a basic outline of the attack. He described the attacker as a shadowy figure, but the trauma of the night had obscured many details. The forensic team scoured the campsite for evidence, but the clues were frustratingly scant. Footprints, bloodstains, and the torn tents were all meticulously documented, yet they offered little in the way of concrete leads. The local community of Espoo was plunged into grief and fear. The loss of 3 young lives in such a brutal manner sent shockwaves through the town. Parents clung to their children, and the once idyllic Lake Bodom was now shrouded in a pall of suspicion and dread. The press descended upon the small community, their sensational headlines amplifying the sense of panic and unease. Initial theories about the motive and identity of the killer were numerous and varied. Some speculated that a deranged local was responsible, while others suggested a more personal motive, perhaps involving jealousy or unrequited love. The sheer brutality of the crime suggested a level of premeditation and rage that baffled investigators. As days turned into weeks, the investigation struggled to gain traction. The lack of clear evidence made it difficult to develop a solid theory. Niels's survival, while miraculous, became a focal point of both hope and suspicion. Some in the community, desperate for answers, began to question how he had lived through such an ordeal. The police, under immense pressure to solve the case, pursued every lead, but each one seemed to end in a frustrating dead end. In an attempt to generate new leads, public appeals for information were made. Potential witnesses were questioned, but their accounts were inconsistent and often contradictory. One man claimed to have seen a stranger near the campsite, while another mentioned hearing screams in the early morning hours. Every new piece of information was diligently followed up, but none provided the breakthrough that was desperately needed. Years passed with the case remaining unsolved. In 1969, a man named Pentti Soininen confessed to the murders while in custody for other crimes. His confession seemed credible at first, but inconsistencies soon emerged. His mental instability further cast doubt on his claims, and eventually, his confession was dismissed as unreliable. The case once again returned to a state of uncertainty. Throughout the decades, the Lake Bodom murders remained a topic of fascination and speculation. Advances in forensic science offered hope, but the evidence was too degraded to yield new clues. Cold case units periodically revisited the investigation, but the passage of time had eroded the trail left by the killer. Niels Wilhelm Gustafsson, despite being acquitted of any involvement, continued to live under the shadow of that night. The suspicion that had followed him took a toll on his life, yet he remained resolute in his innocence. The community too was left to grapple with the lingering mystery, the serene beauty of Lake Bodom forever marred by its macabre legacy. The memory of Mila, Seppo, and Anya was honored in various ways over the years. Memorials were erected, and their story was retold in countless documentaries, books, and articles. Each new generation learned of the tragedy, ensuring that the victims were not forgotten. The enigma of their deaths, however, persisted, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between peace and violence. In 2020, on the 60th anniversary of the murders, a solemn ceremony was held at Lake Bodom. A memorial stone was unveiled, bearing the names of the victims and a plaque that read, "In memory of Maila Irmeli Björklund, Seppo Antero Boisman, and Anya Tulikimäki. May their souls find peace." Niels attended the ceremony, his presence a poignant reminder of survival amidst tragedy. As the sun set over Lake Bodom that evening, casting a golden hue on the water, the community gathered to remember and to hope. Candles were lit, their flickering flames a beacon against the encroaching darkness. The story of the Lake Bodom murders, with all its unanswered questions, remained an enduring part of Finland's history, a testament to the resilience of those left behind and the enduring quest for truth. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of Finland's most chilling and perplexing crimes. The Lake Bodom murders remain a dark chapter in true crime history, shrouded in unanswered questions and lingering suspicions. As we reflect on the lives lost and the relentless pursuit of justice, we are reminded of the fragile line between innocence and horror. If you found this story as captivating as I did, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the world's most unsettling cases. Until next time, stay safe and keep your whispers close.